Welcome to The Current by TreasureCoast.com, where we discuss interesting people, places, and happenings on Florida's Treasure Coast.
Gil, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate you and VoteWater being here on the podcast so we can talk a little bit about what you all do, like we were just talking about before the recording started, kind of holding politicians accountable so that you're not really needed, so that bad legislation doesn't pop up in the first place. Do you want to start by talking about who you are and what you guys do?
Sure. My name's Gil Smart. I'm executive director of an organization called VoteWater. We're a 501c4 organization. We're based in Sewall's Point. Our organization is dedicated to the notion we try to inspire Floridians to demand politicians and policies that promote and protect cleaner water. Our view is that Florida's ongoing water problems, the water crisis in terms of water quality, is at its root a political problem because it's the result of decisions made over the course of years by elected officials at the local, state, and even national levels. And we want people in office who are going to pay more attention to what I call clean water issues, who realize, for example, the importance of clean water to Florida's economy, to Florida's real estate market, to the region's ecology, to human health. We need people in office who realize how central clean water is to our state's prosperity and future. And so that's what we work towards.
Yeah, I think that's a good message. And I think that that's kind of a resounding point that you hear a lot from organizations like yours. We've had similar podcasts with, Captains for Clean Water, Orca up north, and Florida Oceanographic Society. And I think a lot of people are starting to the alarms have been sounding for a while, and it's great to have organizations like yours because it seems like each organization does serve a different purpose. How did you get involved in it? Are you from the area originally? I believe. Are you from the Pennsylvania area?
I am. So
okay.
I was a journalist for the majority of my career. I spent the majority of my career as a journalist in my hometown of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I worked in Pittsburgh as well. But then I came down here to take a job as a columnist with Treasure Coast newspapers, T.C. Palm, the Stewart News, in 2015. And I had, I was always one of those guys who always wanted to live near the water. I always wanted to live at the beach, because for me, living up north the majority of my life, going to the beach meant like a 4-hour drive and sitting in interminable traffic and, that sort of renting a place down, across the street from the ocean, that sort of thing. So I had this idea that I was moving to paradise, and that's Florida's allure, right? I mean, that's why people come here, and
Right.
That's how we market ourselves. It's paradise. Well, my first summer here was the summer of 2016. We had a massive, massive blue-green algae crisis on both coasts. I was here in Stewart on the East Coast, and it was just unbelievable. When they talk about Florida being paradise, they don't mention the blue-green algae. They don't mention, the toxins that are being linked to Alzheimer's and Lou Gehrig's disease and that sort of thing. And I distinctly remember, I always tell the story. My kids were younger then. So we went to the beach at Hope Sound Beach one day, and I was, the dad. I'm the pack animal. I've got the umbrella and the chairs and the cooler, and I'm carrying everything. I set 1 foot on the beach, and the lifeguard up in the tower says, "I wouldn't do that if I were you." I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Look," and he points down the beach, and here comes this big black plume of water. It was the water that was being released from Lake Okeechobee, discolored, coming all the way south, from the St. Lucie Inlet where it comes out of the Atlantic Ocean, coming all the way south to Hope Sound Beach. And ultimately those discharges, that discolored water got all the way down to Palm Beach County. So they were pulling people out of the water, so all my life I wanted to live near the water, and now I live near the water and I couldn't go in the water, and it just seemed ridiculous. And when you encounter something like that, you begin asking questions. You begin asking, how did this happen? Why did this happen? Who let this happen? And at the time I was a columnist for the local paper, I wrote about it. And I got introduced to an organization, our organization, which previously in a previous life was called Bullsugar, bullsugar.org. And I got to know the organization, and they were really going hard at this. They were, as a 501c4, as we are, they could get involved in political issues. They could get involved in endorsing candidates. They could get involved in opposing candidates. And it struck me that that's kind of what this needed. we talk about the need for better policies and more engagement, and it's all true. But unless you have the right people in office who are going to be making good decisions, you might just wind up, back in the trouble you're in. So Bull Sugar was pushing hard for that. That's how I got to know about the organization. I wrote about them on numerous occasions. And then, in 2021, the opportunity came to, step on board as the executive director. And I was very interested in that. And I thought, we could make a difference. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make a difference. We're trying to avoid the crises of the past, the algae crisis of 2016, 2018, 2013. We're trying to prevent that from happening, lay sort of a long-term path towards a future where we don't have discharges to the coast, right? Where we don't have to worry about water quality, where water quality is less of a problem, where you can kayak, you can swim, you can surf, you can do all the things that people do on the water without having to worry, is it safe, right? Because now, too often, the water quality in these areas where people recreate is not good. It's just not, it's just there. It's too often it's contaminated with fecal bacteria. There have been sewer main breaks, or there's septic systems leaking in, or whatever it is. And that doesn't even begin to touch on the blue-green algae aspect of all this. So Florida's waterways are its most precious natural resource. I mean, they're iconic, right? They're on the postcards. That you see these beautiful vistas, these beautiful scenes. But again, what they don't show you is, the water's polluted, right? What they don't show you is, the fish with the lesions. What they don't show you are the fish kills, all the stuff that happens way too often in the state of Florida. And it's because of the political decisions that have been made over the years.
Yeah. I think that's a good kind of framework for, I was going to ask you about the summer of 2016, because I think that's really when, for a lot of people, they started to really take notice. You mentioned Bull Sugar. There were so many local and even state and statewide organizations that kind of came out of that. And, it's funny. I had, at the time, my brother and I had, there was a Subway in Hutchinson Island that we had owned. And so we were right across from the beach, and our neighbor, Cowabunga Surf Camp, you can imagine it's summertime, the beach, and we were completely, there was almost no economics on the island because of that. And, I know what you mean when you talk about kind of a lot of people up north. My father's from Pittsburgh. He's from Monroeville. And so I know what you mean where there's this like idyllic, you think about Florida, the beaches and the postcards. And if we're not able to preserve that, not just for tourists, but for residents, for the real estate market, for everything, I think it says a lot about what our priorities are here. What do you think? Where does it start with politics? I mean, is it something where it starts at a local level and we're talking about sewer transitions? Do you think we talk about the algae or the discharges? What do you see as like the biggest problem that you're looking to tackle for your organization?
There's a lot of very big problems, and it's one of those, it's like how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times, you need to start at the local level. So today's election day, November 4th, and we have endorsed two candidates. One is a guy named Ken Russell for the mayor of Miami, and the other is a guy named, oh God, I'm blanking on his name. Let me look it up. Boy, this is a real fail on my part, isn't it? Hang on a second.
I saw you guys had posted it on Facebook, but I don't remember his name.
Yeah, either. Omar Jimenez. I'm sorry, Omar. Omar Jimenez, and he's a candidate for Miami Beach City Commission. So both of these guys have really emphasized the issue of clean water in their campaigns. Omar founded sort of a neighborhood sustainable organization in his neck of the woods, and he's been pushing for years for infrastructure upgrades. He got involved in this issue largely because there was a sewer main break in his neighborhood, and that prompted the city to put up notices, do not touch the water. And those notices have stayed up for 5 years. For whatever reason, they've not been able to clean up the water. And so here's a guy who has been pushing for this and who understands, in our conversations, he understands how important. He says, look, you can't have a place that you market as paradise when you can't go in the water. You cannot, it's going to have, as you just said about the blue-green algae crisis of 2016, the effect it has on local businesses, the effect it has on just people whose quality of life is undermined by this. So here's a guy who we think would be great on the city commission down in Miami Beach because he would push for more infrastructure upgrades to prevent problems like this, those sorts of things. Those are the types of issues that can be addressed at the local level. Ken Russell, who's running for Miami Beach mayor, we're very impressed with him on a number of levels. He, for example, as a city commissioner in Miami, helped push through an environmental crimes ordinance that, for example, if there's a construction site where water is running off into in his case, Biscayne Bay, that the construction, the contractor can be cited and fined for that. There's aggressive regulation of people who are harming the environment, who are harming the bay, that sort of thing. So those are the type of things that can be done at the local level. We spend a lot of time thinking about stuff going on at the state level, because that's where a lot of the action is. That's where a lot of the rules and regulations regarding development are written and passed. That's where a lot of issues being pushed by the sugar industry, which for a long time has been a major focus of our work. The Florida sugar industry kind of controls water management here in the state of Florida to the detriment of a lot of other folks. There's a lot of pushing for that industry's priorities. So we pay a lot of attention at the state level too, but at the federal level as well. The sugar program was just reauthorized in the big, beautiful bill. The industry got gained a lot of ground out of that. Windfall is going to be coming to the industry because of the loan rate has been increased. So there's issues at every level, and at every level you have to address them. It may be easier at the local level. And, if you start at the local level, you can sort of build your way up, right? If you get some good people in office at the local level and they have success and they're able to pass laws and regulations or enforce existing laws, because a lot of times we're just not doing that, that can result in cleaner water, healthier waterways, then maybe you can build that success up and have people go on to state office, maybe even national office, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's it's interesting because I think a lot of people when they think about they think about it more of as an environmental issue. And so it's interesting when you brought up Omar and kind of the bend of really a public health issue. It's not just about, hey, look, now there's muck and the seagrass isn't there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, when we had the blue-green algae crises here on the Treasure Coast in 2016, 2018, 2013, that was one of the things people were beginning to really worry about, that you had situations where dogs ingested the blue-green algae and became very sick, and at least in one case died. Okay. Yeah. There's research out there that connects the toxins in blue-green algae to neurodegenerative diseases. Again, like I said earlier, Lou Gehrig's disease, Alzheimer's. It's very possible that the long-term effects on human health of those algae crises 10 years ago might not be known for quite some time. In other words, if 20 years from now we see that there's a clusters of, Lou Gehrig's disease in communities along the coast that dealt with that issue, and again, not just on the East Coast, but the West Coast, the Caloosahatchee, I mean, they were dealing with that as well. It's entirely possible, I don't know how probable it is, but it's entirely possible that you're going to see clusters of those sorts of neurodegenerative diseases in those areas because of the effect of the toxins. And you just don't know. There's a lot of emerging research on this. This is something that, the impact on human health is something that we and other organizations fought hard for when they came up with a new Lake Okeechobee playbook on how the water in the lake is managed. We pushed hard for them to include human health and ecological health as criteria for what they, were looking to do. We're looking to safeguard, looking to ensure. So it's not something that, you talk a lot about. But, another example would be, I saw when the waterway here was clogged with blue-green algae, I saw people fishing in that water. Mm-hmm. And presumably they were taking those fish home to eat, I mean, it's crazy. It wasn't until it was, there were some signs up like in Spanish, bilingual signage, wasn't a whole lot, and there was a push for more of it. But, the reality is there were people who ingested fish that were swimming in that toxic goop. What are do we have any idea what the physical effects were on them or might be down the line? It's a huge issue. And again, as blue-green algae becomes more prevalent, as it is throughout the country, throughout the world, I think you're going to hear more and more about this.
Yeah, and you all, do you all work closely with Friends of the Everglades? I know I had seen something there.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about
We
that
are
and how that
affiliated
partnership works?
organization. Yeah, Friends of the Everglades is a 501c3 organization. It's a pure charity that cannot get involved in politics, and they don't.
Right.
I actually serve as policy director for Friends. I wear two hats. I'm policy director for Friends. I'm executive director for VoteWater. VoteWater is a 501c4, so I say we're sister organizations. We do work together, but we have a 501c4 VoteWater because we perceive the need for there to be sort of political activity. We need to do stuff in the political realm, and Friends can't do it, but VoteWater can. So that's kind of how it works.
Right. It's interesting because I think a lot of people, they see a lot of different organizations, and it's interesting the differentiating between 501c3 and 501c4, because I think a lot of times people are wondering what's the best way to get involved and how can they get involved. And so for people knowing that differentiation or which partnerships are there probably can help them get a little bit more involved in some organizations like yours. How do you see people getting involved either here around the Treasure Coast or, statewide?
Well, there's a lot more people who have been getting involved, and that's a trend we'd certainly like to see continue. I'll give you an example. Last year, both Friends and VoteWater and a lot of other groups were very involved in an issue having to do with Florida's state parks. As you may remember, there was a proposal that would have allowed development in Florida's state parks. And coming out of the DeSantis administration, it would have allowed for the construction of a couple golf courses at Jonathan Dickinson State Park in Martin County. Proposal would have allowed for a huge hotel complex or tower to be built at some other state parks and some other development along those lines. There was a huge public outcry about this. People were very protective of their parks. So what happened was we helped channel that outrage by making it so people could visit our website and send a letter to their local legislators or to the Governor DeSantis, provided the phone numbers that they could call. And what we heard from legislators in Tallahassee was they got more calls on that issue, the state park issue, than they'd ever gotten for any other issue, including hot button topics like abortion. Okay. They got more calls on the state issue because we made it easy. Organizations like ours, and a lot of people did this, a lot of groups did this. We made it easy for them to make their opinion known, to voice their opinion. And I tell you what, it got the legislators' attention in Tallahassee. That's one of the big reasons that legislation was passed last session to prevent this type of development in Florida state parks, because people spoke out, because people got involved. And we've seen that in some other situations as well. The social media in particular allows for organizations such as ours to marshal public opinion and to help people, again, make their voices be known by making it easier. Just click here to send a message, fill in this form and send it. Here's the number to call, that sort of thing. More and more people are doing that, and that's a fantastic thing because, again, when legislators' phones are lighting up with calls from people say, don't do this, they want to take a step back and say, well, maybe we shouldn't do this, that sort of thing. So we're seeing more people getting involved, and that's what we want. People should get involved. People, if these issues are important to you, if you are the type of person who likes to spend time on the water and who's not been able to do so, or you've noticed changes, we have people who are here who tell me, used to be, out in Sailfish Flats, the seagrass was everywhere, and you'd see manatees, and and now there's no seagrass. Now it's changed. Or people, inshore fishing guides who can't find fish inshore anymore. That sort of thing. People who have spent a lot of time on the water, who love the water, for whom the water is like integral to their life, and in some cases their business, will tell you things have changed and not for the better. We need those people to be involved. We need people to pick up the phone and call. We need people to write an email or send a letter because, again, it can get results.
Yeah, you're right. There's, I think a lot of people we had Captain Mike Holliday on. He's a local captain, and he's with Captains for Clean Water, and he had kind of mentioned the same thing. He's been a captain here for, I'm pretty sure, going on 4 decades now, if I remember correctly. And that's pretty much what he was saying as well. And I think, you're right. It doesn't surprise me that they got so many calls from that proposal. I remember just the thought when people were talking about golf courses at Jonathan Dickinson. I mean, that's the biggest uproar I've seen in a very, very, very long time. If it had ever been preceded, I mean, it was just going wild. And I think you're right. People, they take the parks, they take their natural ecosystems seriously. And I think that there's always a balance. Florida is growing so much. There's people coming here. You see these developments popping up. You see even around big parks like the Everglades, you see development going up. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts, whether it's a personal opinion or a stance that VoteWater takes as far as, balancing that out with growth and with sustainability, really, and trying to protect these natural resources.
Right. So, VoteWater stands for responsible development, and that's kind of, what does that mean? I don't know that a lot of people think of it in these terms, but growth, development is almost certainly the biggest industry in Florida. When you think of the number of people employed in, what we sometimes call the sprawl industry, sprawl being a term for just endless, development, strip malls, more. If you think of the number of people employed in what we would call the sprawl industry, and that's everyone from, the road crews to the cement mixers, to the people building the houses, to the roofers, to the, the plumbers, to just to the real estate agents who sell the home. If you think of the number of, it's a tremendous economic driver for the state of Florida. Okay. So, and you can't just cut that off. You can't just, you can't just do away with that. But at the same time, and we go back to the issue of Florida waterways, but also if you talk about sort of wild areas, panther habitat, all that sort of stuff, if you pave over these areas, if you pollute the water to the extent that, you really can't fish there anymore, or, that sort of thing, you're killing the golden goose, right? You're killing the goose that lays the golden egg. And unfortunately, Florida's sprawl industry tends to be a little bit myopic. They tend to only see the next 5 years and not think about the next 25 years.
Sure.
We see that almost every legislative session, and we're going to see it again this session because there's already at least one bill filed along these lines, where the development community, which is very plugged in Tallahassee, they give a lot of money to get what they want, and they do usually get what they want. We're seeing bills out of Tallahassee that make it easier to develop areas that, maybe previously you couldn't develop. They cut brakes to the development community to allow for them to push more product through quicker, that sort of thing. Every session, for at least the last 3 sessions, and I guarantee it's going to be this way as well this year, we've called in the session of sprawl because there's so much legislation in there designed to make it quicker and easier for builders to throw up homes. Again, sometimes in areas where they shouldn't, sometimes impacting wetlands where we think that's a really bad idea, sometimes allowing them to get around any sort of public input, by saying that, if you do this type of development in this type of place, it can be approved administratively, which means the county staff can approve it. You don't have to have a public hearing. The public doesn't get a chance to weigh in, that sort of thing. So we see a lot of that type of legislation filed in Tallahassee, in the state capitol. And that's not smart growth. That's not responsible growth. That's pushing through more growth at any cost is what it amounts to. And so we oppose that, and we have opposed that. And there are some legislators who are, really plugged into the development community, some that are developers themselves. And it's just, it's gone too far. And there's been some pushback in recent years. It's going to continue this year. There is a balance. Again, no one's saying, that we're going to save every blade of grass in Florida, but neither should we be looking to pave over every blade of grass in Florida, right? There needs to be some sort of agreement on what responsible growth looks like. And for us, Responsible growth is growth that does not contribute to water pollution, that does not damage wetlands, that does not destroy habitat. Florida prides itself on being a conservative state. We have a Republican supermajority in the legislature. Conservatives need to conserve things. That's one of my big things. And hopefully, we can come to some sort of consensus along those lines.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you make when you talk about, being entrenched or giving money. I think that's what worries a lot of people when it comes to growth and development, is if there are ulterior motives or something under the table, if there's a quid pro quo, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The voters or the public don't really need to know about it, but we donate this money, so you vote this way. Or I think if, we're in a state, and maybe this is something new, maybe it's not, but we're at a point where I think a lot of people really worry about the motives of our politicians, whether it's local, state, or federal. And it's a problem because I think we can't always trust whether someone's got the right intentions, if they really care about the place that we all love. And so I think that's why it's important for us to talk to organizations like yours, to talk about how elected officials can be held accountable, to learn about how they can, maybe follow someone like you if there's some sort of interesting proposal or legislation going on, and how they can get involved, stay informed, and help support the movement to protect the area.
Yeah, we're gonna flag it when there's interesting stuff going on in the legislature. We're definitely gonna flag it. I also want to get in a plug here for something you just said. We have done a lot of work with what I call dirty money, which is political contributions from polluting industries to politicians, that's designed to pave the way for them to get what they want. So last year we published, and we've continued to update what we call it's on our website. It's the Dirty Money Project, and it's a database of South Florida politicians at the county, state, and federal level, and who they've gotten money from. So it's all their political contributions, and there's definitely a correlation. There's a lot of industries that give a lot of money to a lot of people, and they do it because it works. They do it because they're looking to get what they want. They're looking to curry favor, political favor, and get their legislation passed, that sort of thing. And it works. So we have there's over 140 elected officials that we've analyzed the money that they get, and we've marked where they get money from the sugar industry, from the development of the sprawl industry, from utilities, from phosphate mining, from other polluting industries. We've marked it, and it's amazing the amount of money floating around out there that's being given, to politicians. It's just astonishing. And a lot of times it doesn't go directly to the politician. Like, let's say I'm a smokestack industry polluting the water, and local politician Joe Schmo, I want him to do what I want him to do. I want him to vote for legislation or advance legislation that's going to benefit my industry at the expense of the water. I could give him the money directly, but you know what I could also do? I could also give to a whole bunch of political action committees. I can give more to the PACs than I would be able to give to him directly. And then the PACs can turn around and give to him. That's how it works. Right. In Florida. And it's just the amount of money spent is astonishing. As part of our Dirty Money Project, we also did a project on lobbying. We looked at lobbying and how many industries have how many lobbyists. We found that the sugar industry, for example, between 2018 and 2024, over that time span, employed 99 lobbyists just in Tallahassee. How many lobbyists do I have? How many lobbyists does the St. Lucie River have? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Political money makes the world go round. There's a joke told by the late comedian Robin Williams, who said he thinks politicians should wear sponsor jackets like NASCAR drivers, so we know who.
I've heard that. Yeah, that's hilarious. It's true.
That's what the Dirty Money Project to accomplish. That's what the Dirty Money Project seeks to accomplish. So when you see some of these politicians who over the course of years have taken thousands and thousands of dollars from the sugar industry and PACs affiliated with the sugar industry, you can be pretty sure how that person's going to vote on legislation that affects the sugar industry. So
I think that's a great point, Gil. And I appreciate you being on. I appreciate you giving us this rundown, and we can kind of link to the social medias if people want to follow you, the website, Dirty Money, all that kind of stuff, so people can check it out and hopefully get involved, hopefully pay attention more and more as things continue to develop, and inevitably finding more ways to get involved or new ways to kind of maybe push back, as you guys, as you said, raise the flag and sound the alarm on certain things. So thanks again for being on. And I truly appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Gil.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Current by TreasureCoast.com. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Follow us on social media or visit TreasureCoast.com for local events, tips, and news. Have a guest or topic you'd love to hear on the show? Let us know at TreasureCoast.com. Until next time, keep riding the current and enjoying everything the Treasure Coast has to offer. See you soon.